Our next guest teaches Chicago literature, film, history, and culture at Northwestern University and the Newberry Library of Chicago. He regularly writes book reviews for the Chicago Tribune, op-ed essays for Crane's Chicago Business, and various random things for other publications with Chicago on their mastheads, and performs live lit essays for the paper Machete and other venues. His most recent book project with Paul Durica, was an edited and annotated edition of Chicago by Day and Night, the Pleasure Seeker's Guide to the Paris of America, an in-the-know guide to Chicago nightlife during the 1893 World's Fair. He's currently at work on edited and annotated editions of Ben Hecht's autobiography and George Ade's The Old Time Saloon, both forthcoming from the University of Chicago Press. You can follow him on Twitter at RogersParkMan. Please welcome Bill Savage.
And please feel free to get a drink anytime. It's especially appropriate for this essay. And let me also say thanks to everybody for coming out. Thanks to Gators Block and Tuesday Funk for inviting me. And I'm honored to be reading with such a distinguished group of fellow readers. It's really an honor. So my title is Against Dives, a Rant. For the last 3 summers, I've been teaching a course at the Newberry Library called The City That Drinks, the Chicago Saloon in History, Film, and Literature. While one former student refers to this as my, quote, drinking class, unquote, the actual focus was not on imbibing, though the weekly after-class field trips to various venues were always very well attended. You'd think I was giving a quiz or something. Bars constitute what sociologist Ray Oldenburg defined as the third place, neither home nor work, a place where people go out of their own free will and form communities based on common interests and concerns, like I would say, literature. My class delves into how urban bars function as social spaces where people negotiate and construct American identity. Some history. Until Prohibition upset the beer truck, bars in Chicago could be classed into 2 broad categories. First, American bars, located downtown and near industry, owned and operated almost always by assimilated German or Irish immigrants. And second, immigrant bars in ethnic neighborhoods. And by the way, this isn't research original to me. This is Perry Dewis's great work, The Saloon. That's what I'm drawing on here. In the immigrant-dominated Chicago of those decades, basically the 1860s through the 1930s, or 20s with Prohibition, newcomers to the city created new identities in the dynamic between these 2 sorts of saloons. In their ethnic neighborhood bars, people would speak the language of the old country, and food and music would reinforce the left side of the hyphen. Polish or Bohemian or Lithuanian or German hyphen American. In American bars, industrial workers got a free lunch with their nickel beer and mixed across national boundaries and with what were then called Native Americans, which is to say people born in America, generally of Protestant stock, immigrating to Chicago from some rural hinterland. Yes, I know, Native American means something else now, just no. In these American bars, you would work on your English and perhaps that union organizing drive. Different sorts of bars serve different social and cultural purposes. This bar genre taxonomy diversified after Prohibition, and even more so with deindustrialization, suburbanization, television, and various social liberation movements of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. But bar subgenres remain tied to different sorts of identities nevertheless. Gender, the straight singles bar or the gay bar, personal enthusiasms, sports bars, music bars, comedy bars, art bars, artisanal cocktail lounges, which I've never been to one of, but I understand they're fabulous. There are bars for different occupations. Cop bars, which I have been to and they're not fabulous. Family connections. Traders bars down in the South Loop. The holdout industrial workers bars along Western or Ashland. Bars also continue to represent ethnic or racial identities, and so our divided city ensures that Pilsen and Little Village will have many Latino tavernas. Polish bars flourish up Milwaukee and down Archer, while South and West Side African American and white flight neighborhoods include bars as segregated as their streets. The cultural meaning of different bars is not set, though. It depends on more than the physical space or the neighborhood or who owns it or who works there. It depends just as much on the attitudes that individual drinkers bring to the place, its workers, its owners, and the other drinkers. Nobody's in line. Jason's so lonely. I'll have a zombie dust when I'm done, dude. For instance, what one person might consider a perfectly fine sports bar, with all the games on countless TVs and hot wings dished up by hot waitresses, another person might consider a sexist, douchebag, bro-ridden, patriarchal, commercial, empty, media values hellhole. Not to put too fine a point on it. In my students' examination of different sorts of bars, represented in literature by the likes of Finn and Peter Dunn, Nelson Algren, and Mike Royko, as well as live and in person, one label came up repeatedly: dive bar. One of our post-class field trip destinations, the Old Town Ale House on North Avenue, which I intended to go to show how art can function to shape the politics of a place. That bar even describes itself in one painting by owner Bruce Elliott as, quote, Chicago's premier dive bar. I guess using French makes it classy. The term dive bar annoys me. It strikes me as condescending and contrary to the positive spirit a well-intentioned bar patron should exhibit. By the way, I don't mean that bars called dives are bad places necessarily, just that the term dive bar is a bad term for a place you might want to go. And let's acknowledge that not all bars are good bars, but when generalizing here, I'm thinking mostly of well-run, well-intentioned places, not the bad ones. Dismissing a bad bar as a dive, a shithole one would not want to go into, makes perfect sense. But why use a negative term to name a place you want to go to? I wondered whether other folks shared my attitude. To do such cutting-edge social science research, I turned to that essential scholarly tool of Twitter. See if anything's happening right now. No, I'm good. In a Twitter poll I ran last week with some 70-some responses, so it's totally scientific.
It's over 20.
It's over 20, that's science? Thank you. 18% agreed with me that the term dive bar is negative, and 82% thought it was merely descriptive, a neutral term, just another bar genre. But whether one likes the term or not, another question remains. Where does it come from? What's the etymology of the actual word and its usage? The Oxford English Dictionary's third definition of the noun dive: colloquial, original US, an illegal drinking den, or other disreputable place of resort, often situated in a cellar, basement, or other half-concealed place into which frequenters may dive without observation. I love the word frequenters. It's never going to replace regulars, but I like frequenter. That's got a little English to it. The OED's first citation of this usage is from 1871 in the New York Herald, a story describing, quote, one of the gaily decorated dives where young ladies dispense refreshments to thirsty souls. This is at a time when women bartenders would have been probably de facto prostitutes. No, not joking, absolutely. Such a definition clearly derives from the American prohibitionist and Puritan attitude that drinking, especially public drinking, is inherently sinful and shameful. One only has to dive into a bar surreptitiously if one wants to conceal one's thirst for something stronger than lemonade from one's judgmental neighbors. A more contemporary definition of dive focuses on its physical nature. Jonathan Stockton, in his 2005 book, Chicago's Best Dive Bars, writes, dive bars are old and broken. The padding on the stools are ripped. Duct tape holds the cooler door to its hinges, which, by the way, would not work, so I don't know where he was saying. I'm speaking from like 30 plus years of bartending experience. The hinges and duct tape, the window might be held on by duct tape, but not the hinges. Signs are burned out or faded, and the toilets smell of urine. The floors beneath them rotted from years of overflow. Mirrors are cracked, the paint a flaky mess. A can of roach killer is in open view. Appetizing. He had me nodding up till the bathroom business. But these inquiries help me focus my problem with the use of the term dive. Because for me, what defines a dive bar is not its decrepitude, but the assumed relationship between the drinker and the place. To say dive puts the place and the other drinkers there beneath the social status of the person using the term. This structure calls to mind another term that emphasizes social divisions in public spaces: slumming. The OED again. To visit slums for charitable or philanthropic purposes, or out of curiosity, especially as a fashionable pursuit, frequently in phrase, to go slumming. To slum, or I would argue to dive, also means, the second definition they give of slumming, to accept, temporarily and voluntarily, a standard of parentheses, of living, travel, etc., close parentheses, lower than that to which one is accustomed, to mix with one's inferiors. This should be a problem for anyone with egalitarian ideals. Another historian and bar scholar who shares my distrust of the term is Liz Garibay, whose exhibition on the history of beer in Chicago is currently up at the Elmhurst Historical Museum and will soon move to the Harold Washington branch of the Chicago Public Library. She writes to me in an email, "Whenever I hear someone use the term dive bar, I immediately think it's a place that's, quote, less than fill in the blank, unquote. Less than pretty, less than up to par, less than anyone I would spend time with, less than me. The term is elitist. Dive bars, in my opinion," she writes, "should be just called old neighborhood bars because that's exactly what they are." But can the term be used positively? Back to Twitter. One of my essential retweets that got me up to the 70-something, it was an account called @ChicagoBars, which is an anonymous account run by some guy who works as a lobbyist for the bar industry. And he writes, but he has funny stuff sometimes. He writes, "Dive bar equals a modest bar, at least 10 years old, no kitchen, and a good bartenders that can't even spell mixology." There's still a touch of condescension there, and personally, as a bartender who can spell but would not practice mixology, I take offense, even umbrage, at the idea that ignorance is somehow a good thing. But this is much more neutral and less disgusting than Stockton's emphasis on urine and vermin. The key positive idea, a good quote-unquote dive bar has endurance. 10 years might not sound like much, especially in this area here in Andersonville with so many decades-old places like this place and Simon's and Konak's next door as well. But most bars and restaurants don't last. Being a dive, according to this definition, is in no small part about a place's staying power, which, if you ponder it for a minute, means customers. Loyal customers who regularly spend enough time to keep a place going over the long haul. Just to be absolutely clear, I am not disinclined to patronize a bar that is old, inexpensive, and nothing fancy. In fact, hot belief accepted, that's my general preference. What I don't like is the label dive and its implicit condescension. This condescension rankles because bars have the potential, at least, to be democratic spaces. That is, spaces where, because they are open to anyone of legal drinking age, people form relationships based on something other than blood or money, work, family or work. But to position oneself above such a place and its people, even as you share it, is simply wrong. These redefinitions notwithstanding, perhaps a dive bar by any other name is still a dive bar. But the language with which we label places matters, as words fundamentally shape our understanding of the world. We see this all the time in other more serious realms of our urban conversations about politics, crime, violence, and identity. Is Englewood, for instance, a neighborhood or the ghetto? Words matter. Corner or neighborhood bars are potentially among the most democratic and egalitarian of urban spaces. In the Old Time Saloon, his 1932 book where he worked to repeal prohibition, Chicago journalist George Ade wrote, quote, "The saloon was the rooster crow of the spirit of democracy," unquote, because unlike the church to which he was comparing it, the saloon welcomed everyone, quote, "regardless of his private conduct, his clothes, his manners, his previous record, or his ultimate destination." While in the theory any member of the public can patronize any place that opens its doors, in reality people with less money or mobility will not be spending any time or money in higher-end places. They cannot afford to squander any of their resources. But people who can drop $20 for a fancy cocktail someplace downtown can drink at the neighborhood bar, where that same double sawbuck will get you 4 beers and leave enough for a generous tip. In a society riven by so many divisions, any place that offers the opportunity to connect across divides of class should be valued, looked up to, not down on. So, a plea to end my rant. When you choose to go someplace inexpensive and no thrills, call it a corner bar or a neighborhood joint, but not a dive. You are not above it. It is not beneath you, and neither are the people who perhaps more regularly frequent it. Be a patron, but don't patronize. Thank you.